Once there was a princess named Elle. Not Ellie this time, Elle.
You did it again.
And
your name is
she was a
Tam.
pretty little princess. She was about 8 years old. She had long braided brown hair. And she had whenever she laughed, she made a funny little squeak noise. But everybody thought it was cute. But she woke up one morning. She woke up one morning and she found everybody in the whole castle was completely turned to stone. Just wherever they were standing at that moment, it was like walking through a bunch of statues. When she first got up, she could just see a shadow of somebody. She said, "Why are you standing so still?" And then they didn't move, and she got up closer, and she could tell they'd been turned to stone. That's why they didn't move. So she went up to her mother's, the queen's chamber, which was the big fancy, parlor, bedroom of the place. And had tapestries on the walls and silk curtains. And she saw her mother over at the makeup cabinet. She ran after her mom, but her mom was a statue too, and she could see where the makeup was just like flaking off of her because she'd been trying to put it on right when she turned to stone. And so people had been turned to stone right while they were doing stuff, right? So she got to the dressmaker's workshop. And the dressmakers were there, but the sewing machines had kept going. And all the gowns were sewn together and all in this big pile. And all the seamstresses were just sitting there at the machines. They weren't even moving.
Machine overload.
And so she went out. She's running around trying to find someone who hasn't turned into a statue, but everybody's there. And she runs out, and the captain of the guard was out there. He's standing in the courtyard, and there was a pigeon on his shoulder, and it had pooped on him. Because pigeons like to poop on statues. I don't know if you knew that.
I know.
And she walked by right off the royal throne room was where the jester hung out, and he had a parrot, and the parrot had turned to stone, and because it was so heavy, it had just flipped upside down, was hanging upside down on its perch. Just, Polly want a stone cracker? No.
No.
He's just there.
Please help me back.
And so she walked by. The butler kept a dog, and then the huntsman kept dogs. So there was always dogs around the castles. And there was a big hound that was always hanging out by the throne room. And he was chewing on a bone when he got turned to stone. And she could see that all his drool had just dropped out like little pebbles on the floor because it had turned to stone too.
I guess that counts as a person. Yes.
Dogs are people.
And so she's running around everywhere. She goes outside the kitchen where they keep the chicken coop, and all the eggs had turned to stone, and they'd rolled down into a big pile.
When they turn off the stone, then that will be easy.
Yeah, because it'll be right there. So she's walking around. She's walking everywhere trying to find anybody, but everybody, like outside the castle, inside the castle, everybody's turned to stone. But she's walking by the fortune teller's tent, and she heard a whisper coming from the fortune teller's crystal ball, because the fortune teller is just there. She's frozen. The whisper said, "Restore the whole."
The what?
The whole, like the whole something. And she found...
Like the hole in the donut.
Yeah, no, this is like the whole of everything, like the whole.
Restore the donut hole.
Yeah, sort of like that.
Donut hole.
But when she heard that, she looked down in the dirt. She found half of a gold bracelet. It was like kind of like an old, like antique bracelet, not super fancy, but it looked like it was really old because she was in olden times, and it looked like even older than that. It was old, half of a bracelet, just sitting there in the dirt. And she said, "This is half. The whole might be finding the whole bracelet. Maybe that's the whole mystery to this stone thing." So she starts wandering around looking for clues, and she looked at the mosaic. You know what a mosaic is?
Mm-hmm.
These little pieces of tile that make a picture. And she was in the grand hall, and she noticed that the tiles around the queen's wrist, where she would be wearing a bracelet, were missing. And those were completely gone. It makes her think that there's something going on with this bracelet. And then she looked in all her mother's jewelry boxes, right? And her mom's a queen. This took like 2 hours just to look through all her jewelry bracelets. All her jewelry boxes. And she found lots and lots of bracelets, some pearl bracelets, some ones with opals, more than a few bracelets with diamonds. But none of them were broken, and none of them were missing any pieces. So all she still had was this broken bracelet piece she had. And she thinks, I've got to find the other half. That's what the crystal ball said. So she went down to the palace jeweler's workshop, which was down, not in the dungeon, but pretty far down there where they could work with, with hot coals and things like that. And it was a design, they made all the royal jewels were made there. So she saw drawings on there with like a design for a bracelet just like hers. And they looked old. They were like on an old parchment, and they had been there a long time. And it looked just like the whole one of what hers would have been, like the half piece she found. But she didn't find any finished parts for it.
Why can't she just build it according to plans?
Does she look like a jeweler?
No.
And plus she thinks she has to find the other half of that specific bracelet. That's what she's looking for. So she looks in the royal library where they have all the scrolls with all the history of the kingdom. And she learned that a long time ago, in a war, the first queen. Remember, we saw the first queen in the whatchamacallit, in the mosaic, and
queen.
and we'd seen that the things were the tiles were missing from where her wrist was. She found out that first queen had been given a bracelet by a sorceress in this war. It had something to do with the war, something to do with her being the first queen.
I'm a sorceress.
So Elle starts looking. She decides to look in the hedge maze, which was, the royal gardens have mazes made out of hedges.
Yeah.
And she felt the half of the bracelet she's holding in her hand. It began to tingle, like made a little. So she's walking through the maze. She's feeling it tingle, and a fairy appears. Just a little fairy, one of those little tiny ones, dancing through the air. And she comes by, and she looks at Elle, and Elle looks back at her, and she beckons her. So she follows a little fairy through the maze, and she lights down. She flies down on the stone, and Elle starts digging there, and she finds the bracelet piece. She links them together, puts the two pieces together. And she hears everybody waking up all over the palace, and the fairy whispers to her that they have to do something with the bracelet. Now that they've restored the two halves, they have to keep them together. That's obviously important for the kingdom. So while everybody's waking up and everybody's kind of freaking out, whatever they've been frozen from, Elle runs over with the fairy, and they hide the things together under a stone at the corner of the castle, where they think nobody will look for it. And then Elle runs in and finds everybody awake, and she keeps that two bracelet pieces a secret because she never wants them to be taken apart again. And then they all live, happily ever after. They weren't stones anymore.
What happened to the bracelet?
Didn't you just listen?
I listened.
They buried it.
I listened, but then I knew they buried it. But it's like something has to happen with it.
They put it back together.
That's part two.
No, I know that.
That's part two. The poodle and the bracelet.
No, they restored the two halves had been broken apart for so long, and that's why everybody turned to stones. They had to find the two,
I know that.
put them back
100
together.
Years from then, someone's gonna find it, and it's gonna be a poodle.
Yeah, like something's gonna find it. I can tell.
Okay, well
And then that has to be some sort of a story later on. You have to write one
Okay.
like
I
that.
bet you should write it.
No.